The king laughed, until a hand appeared from nowhere and wrote his death sentence on the wall. Before sunrise, he was dead. Night had swallowed Babylon in gold. Music echoed through the royal palace. Torches burned against walls covered in wealth, stolen from conquered nations. Noblemen laughed loudly. Dancers moved through clouds of incense. Wine flowed endlessly across tables, heavy with meat, fruit, and treasures from across the empire. And at the center of it all sat the young king of Babylon. Belshazzar leaned back proudly on his throne, surrounded by power, surrounded by luxury, surrounded by people who believed Babylon could never fall. Outside the walls, enemies were already moving closer. But inside the palace, no one cared, because Babylon looked untouchable. The walls were massive. The army was feared. The city had survived every threat thrown against it. To the people inside that palace, this wasn't a night of danger. It was a night of celebration. And then the king made a decision that changed everything. Drunk with pride and desperate to impress his guests, Belshazzar demanded something sacred, something that never should have entered that room. Servants hurried away into the treasury vaults beneath the palace. Moments later, they returned, carrying golden cups and silver vessels, stolen years earlier from the temple of God in Jerusalem. These were not ordinary treasures. They had once stood inside the holy temple. They had been used in worship before the presence of God himself. But in Babylon, they became party decorations. The room erupted in cheers as the sacred vessels were distributed across the feast hall. Wine was poured into cups dedicated to God. Noblemen raised them into the air. Women laughed beside them. The king drank proudly from holy vessels while praising idols made of gold, silver, bronze, wood, and stone. The atmosphere grew louder, more arrogant, more reckless. And then, everything changed. Without warning, the music stopped. A strange silence swept across the hall. Somebody screamed. Near the palace wall, illuminated by the flickering torchlight, fingers appeared from empty darkness. Not a full body, not a shadow, only a human hand. Alive. Moving slowly across the wall. Writing. Every person in the palace froze in terror. The king stared at the moving fingers as the words burned themselves into the plaster beside the lampstand. No one understood the message, but everyone understood the fear. Belshazzar's face drained of color instantly. His mouth trembled. His body shook so violently that his knees knocked together beneath his royal robes. The mighty king of Babylon suddenly looked helpless. The laughter vanished from the room. No music, no dancing, no confidence, only terror. The mysterious words remained glowing across the wall, while thousands stood frozen beneath them. Belshazzar shouted for his wise men, his astrologers, his magicians, his interpreters. Anyone. He promised wealth, gold, and power to whoever could explain the writing. But one by one they failed. None of Babylon's greatest minds could understand the message written by the supernatural hand. And the king became even more afraid, because deep inside, he already knew this was no ordinary warning. This was judgment. As panic spread through the palace, an older voice entered the chaos. The queen mother stepped into the hall and looked upon the terrified king. She remembered someone forgotten by the empire. A man taken captive from Judah many years earlier. A man known for interpreting mysteries and dreams. A man filled with unusual wisdom. Daniel. The king immediately ordered Daniel to be brought into the palace. Soon, the old prophet entered the feast hall. The atmosphere was completely different now. Fear had replaced arrogance. The sacred cups still sat scattered across the tables, half filled with wine. Silent witnesses to blasphemy. Belshazzar tried to regain control of himself as Daniel approached. He offered rewards, purple robes, gold chains, authority in the kingdom. But Daniel refused the gifts. He did not come for wealth. He came with a message. Then the old prophet looked directly at the king, and the room became completely silent. Daniel reminded Belshazzar about his father, King Nebuchadnezzar II, a ruler once filled with pride until God humbled him completely. Nebuchadnezzar had learned that human power means nothing before the Most High God. But Belshazzar had ignored that lesson. He knew the history. He knew what God had done before. Yet he still lifted himself against heaven. He still mocked what was sacred. He still drank wine from holy vessels while worshiping lifeless idols that could neither see nor hear. Then Daniel turned toward the glowing words on the wall and finally revealed their meaning. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found lacking. Carves, your kingdom will be divided and given to the Medes and Persians. The room stood frozen in horror. This was not merely a warning. It was a sentence. Babylon's judgment had already begun. Even then, Belshazzar still ordered Daniel to be rewarded. Purple robes were placed upon the prophet. Gold chains hung around his neck. But none of it mattered anymore. Because outside the walls of Babylon, the enemy was already entering the city. While the feast continued, Persian forces had quietly diverted the Euphrates River, flowing beneath Babylon's defenses. The water level dropped. Hidden entrances became exposed. Soldiers moved silently through the darkness. Closer, closer, closer. Inside the palace, fear still gripped the nobles. Some stared at the wall. Others stared at the sacred cups, as if suddenly realizing what they had done. Then came the sounds from outside. Distant shouting, metal clashing, running footsteps, screams. The palace doors burst open. Chaos exploded through the hall. Babylon, the city that believed itself eternal, was collapsing in a single night. Guards rushed in confusion. Nobles fled in terror. Torches fell onto the floor as panic consumed the palace, and before dawn arrived, Belshazzar was dead. The mighty king who mocked God during his feast never saw another sunrise. Babylon fell exactly as the writing declared. In one night, an empire collapsed, not because its walls were weak, not because its wealth disappeared, but because pride convinced its rulers they could dishonor God without consequence. The sacred cups remained. The feast ended. The music died. And the glowing message on the wall became one of the most terrifying warnings in history. A kingdom weighed. A king judged. A night of celebration turned into a night of destruction. Because they drank from God's sacred cups. And that same night, they died.